Your life hasn't fallen apart. You've simply arrived at a threshold most people never reach. Recently, something shifted inside you, quiet but absolute. The things that used to excite you stopped working. Conversations began to feel recycled. Goals that once pushed you forward suddenly rang hollow. Even ambition loosened its grip. This moment feels unsettling because it arrived without warning, and now you're standing in a space where nothing seems to matter the way it used to. Most people panic when motivation disappears. They label it failure, burnout, or weakness. They scramble to fix themselves, to force enthusiasm back into place, to become who they were before. But here's what almost no one tells you. This isn't collapse. This is the exact moment clarity begins to form, just not in a shape you were taught to recognize. This moment only happens to certain people, and the fact that you're here means you're one of them. There comes a day when the usual things stop doing their job. Entertainment feels flat. Ambition loses its pull. The future you were chasing suddenly feels like someone else's dream. These things didn't fail you because you're broken. They stopped working because they were never meant to carry you this far. They were distractions, emotional anesthesia, background noise designed to keep you moving without asking why. Now they can't. For the first time, you're fully present with yourself, and that level of presence doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels exposed. When you realize the things that once numbed you no longer work, the mind interprets that as danger. But what's actually happening is simpler. The illusion cracked. You've outgrown the need to distract yourself from your own awareness. And once you see that, there's no going back. Only forward into something most people never reach. When interest fades, it doesn't just take motivation with it. It takes the version of you that knew who they were because they always wanted something. Desire shaped your personality. It gave you direction, urgency, hunger. When that disappears, it can feel like your identity went with it. You wake up, and there's no pull toward the future you were building, no need to prove anything, no drive to become someone. That's when the fear starts, because most of us were taught that wanting is who we are. But you're not empty right now. You're exposed. A lot of what felt like identity was actually momentum. Habits, ambitions, and roles built around goals that once made sense but no longer fit. When those fall away, the structure holding your sense of self goes with them. That's why this phase hurts in a way people don't talk about. Growth can feel like grief. Watching your old self disappear can feel like a quiet death. There's a specific sadness that comes with realizing you can't go back to who you were even if you tried. You remember how driven you used to feel, how certain, how alive. And now, standing here, it feels like something essential is missing. What's actually happening is heavier and simpler at the same time. You didn't lose yourself. You lost the version of you that was built on needing something external to feel real. That loss isn't failure. It's space being cleared. If you're watching this and everything feels muted, if you're questioning your direction, your drive, even your place in the world, listen carefully. I know how heavy it feels to wake up without desire. The idea of wanting nothing sounds peaceful in theory, but living it can feel unsettling, like you've been unplugged from life itself. You might be wondering if you're falling behind, if you've lost your edge, if something inside you stopped working. Here's the truth no one says out loud. This phase doesn't last forever, but it matters more than most phases ever will. It's the pause where nothing is demanded of you, even if your mind keeps insisting something should be. You're not required to chase clarity right now. You're not meant to force meaning back into places that have already gone quiet. There's a reason you're feeling this way, and it has nothing to do with failure. Your system is recalibrating. Your inner compass is learning to point toward what's actually true instead of what you were taught to chase. That takes time. It takes stillness. And it takes trust in something you can't yet see forming underneath the surface. If what I'm saying resonates with you, please consider subscribing. I create content specifically for people going through transitions like this, moments where the usual advice doesn't reach you anymore. Subscribing means you'll have a space to come back to when things feel heavy, and that matters more than you might think right now. Now let's go deeper into what's actually happening during this phase. This phase is lonely in a very specific way, and that's why almost no one talks about it. It's the loneliness that shows up when you can't fake enthusiasm anymore. You're still around people. You still show up. You still participate. But something inside you refuses to perform. Laughing on cue feels forced. Reacting the way people expect feels dishonest. And yet nothing in your life looks wrong enough to explain why you feel so far away from everything. That's what makes this phase so isolating. You don't have a clean story to tell. You can't say you're heartbroken or burned out or lost. On the outside, things look fine, maybe even better than before. So when people ask what's going on, you hesitate because you don't have language for it yet. When you try to explain, it sounds vague or ungrateful, even to your own ears. I'm not sad. I'm not depressed. I'm just not there anymore. That sentence alone can make you feel misunderstood. What hurts most is how often people expect you to snap out of it, to get motivated again, to remember who you used to be. But that's the problem. You're not who you used to be. Pretending otherwise feels heavier than staying quiet. This isn't a breakdown. It's a refusal. A refusal to keep performing emotions you no longer feel. That refusal separates you from the version of yourself everyone else still recognizes. Outgrowing the act is lonelier than wearing it, but it's also the moment you stop betraying yourself. A lot of people mistake this phase for emptiness, but real emptiness doesn't feel like this. Emptiness is flat. It doesn't question anything. What you're experiencing aches because it's honest. The discomfort comes from seeing clearly for the first time without anything softening the edges. When the usual distractions stop working, when excitement feels forced and motivation feels artificial, you're left face to face with a truth that was always there but easy to avoid. That truth can feel heavy before it feels freeing. What starts to hurt isn't the lack of feeling. It's the realization of how much of life was lived on autopilot. How many things you chased because they looked meaningful from the outside. How many conversations you stayed in because they filled silence. How many goals you carried simply because they gave you direction without giving you truth. When that awareness hits, the ground shifts underneath you. Everything familiar feels strange. This is the moment where clarity shows up without comfort. You're no longer being carried by momentum. You're no longer numbed by routine. You're seeing your life without filters, without noise, without emotional padding. When that happens, it becomes impossible to feel excited about things that never actually mattered to you. Your inner compass stopped lying. Honesty hurts when it arrives after a long time of pretending. There's a quiet grief in realizing how much energy went into sustaining versions of life that didn't fit. That energy wasn't wasted, just misaligned. Grief doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like indifference. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Sometimes it looks like losing interest in things you once thought defined you. That doesn't mean you're disconnected from life. It means you're finally disconnected from what wasn't true. This isn't numbness. Numbness is absence. This is presence without distraction. You're feeling less because you're seeing more. Once that happens, the mind doesn't let you go back to caring out of habit. When awareness arrives, enthusiasm for the fake disappears first. That's discernment turning on. There's nothing wrong with feeling nothing toward paths that were never yours. There's nothing broken about outgrowing excitement that was built on pressure, expectation, or survival. What feels like loss right now is actually precision developing. Your system is refining itself. It's learning what deserves energy and what never did. That refinement can feel uncomfortable, even isolating before it feels right. But understand this clearly. This phase only visits people who are ready to stop lying to themselves. You're not empty. You're no longer willing to feel things just to feel normal. That honesty, even when it feels quiet and heavy, is the foundation for a life that won't require pretending ever again. One of the most invisible forces shaping this entire experience is the pressure to remain recognizable. Society is deeply uncomfortable with inner change that doesn't come with a clear explanation or visible upgrade. We're taught that consistency equals stability and stability equals success. If you wake up one day and your interests shift, your energy drops, or your priorities no longer match the version of you people are used to, it's treated like something went wrong rather than something moved forward. From a very young age, people are rewarded for predictability. You get praised for sticking to a path, for wanting the same things, for having a clear answer when someone asks what you're doing with your life. That conditioning doesn't leave much room for internal transitions that don't come with immediate results. So when your inner world starts changing quietly without a new title or achievement attached to it, the world doesn't know how to place you anymore. When the world can't place you, it starts pushing back. That's when the self-doubt creeps in, not because your inner shift feels wrong, but because it's not being mirrored or validated externally. You start wondering if you're regressing, if you're losing momentum, if you're wasting time. The pressure isn't always loud. Sometimes it's subtle comments, raised eyebrows, or the unspoken expectation that you should get back to who you were. Over time, this pressure trains people to distrust their own inner timing and override natural phases of change just to remain acceptable. What makes this especially difficult is that inner change rarely announces itself. There's no clear finish line, no before and after moment that makes sense to others. It looks like nothing is happening even when something fundamental is rearranging inside you. Because society values visible progress over internal alignment, people are encouraged to keep moving even when movement no longer feels honest. When the world rewards sameness, listening to your inner shift can feel like self-sabotage. Staying the same isn't stability. It's stagnation. Growth that doesn't disrupt your identity isn't growth at all. The discomfort you feel isn't because you're failing to keep up. It's because you're no longer willing to ignore what's shifting inside you. That resistance you feel from the outside world is often the clearest sign that you're changing in ways that can't be easily explained. Those are usually the changes that matter most. There's a very real, very logical reason motivation disappears during this phase, and it has nothing to do with you becoming lazy, weak, or unfocused. Most motivation throughout life is borrowed. It comes from external pressure, the promise of reward, the need for approval, the fear of falling behind, or the fear of being inadequate. Psychologically, these forces are extremely effective. They keep people moving, striving, chasing. But they aren't permanent. They work only as long as your nervous system still responds to them. At some point, something shifts. The same rewards stop feeling rewarding. Approval loses its ability to energize you. Fear no longer produces momentum, only exhaustion. This is often mistaken for burnout, but it's frequently a sign that your mind has stopped accepting incentives that no longer match your internal values. When that happens, motivation doesn't fade slowly. It drops off a cliff. Without understanding why, it can feel terrifying, like you've lost the engine that once carried you forward. Boredom plays a much deeper role here than people give it credit for. Boredom isn't emptiness. It's a refusal to engage with stimulation that no longer feels meaningful. When the brain stops being driven by external triggers, it creates a vacuum. That vacuum is uncomfortable. Without constant stimulation, you're left with yourself, your thoughts, and a clear view of what you've been chasing. This is why boredom feels heavy instead of neutral. It removes the emotional padding that kept life feeling busy and purposeful. What most people don't realize is that this is often the first time motivation fails for the right reason. You're no longer being pulled forward by fear or pushed by expectation. You're standing still because nothing in front of you is worth moving toward yet. That stillness feels like stagnation, but psychologically it's a pause that allows recalibration. The mind stops reacting so it can reassess. When motivation disappears, it's often because your mind is done being bribed. Meaning doesn't appear in a rushed state. It can't compete with noise, pressure, or desperation. It emerges when attention becomes selective, when energy is no longer wasted on things that don't resonate. That's why meaning tends to arrive after everything else has gone quiet, clearly and naturally. When it does, it doesn't require forcing yourself to move. It pulls you. This phase isn't the absence of drive. It's the end of false fuel. There is a very specific kind of discomfort that comes from being between lives, and it's nothing like confusion or indecision. It's the feeling of knowing deep down that the old version of your life is no longer accessible to you. Even if it still exists on the surface, the routines are still there, the environment might be the same, the people around you may not have changed at all. But you can't step into it the same way anymore. Something internal has closed, quietly but completely. Pretending otherwise takes more energy than you have. At the same time, the next chapter hasn't revealed itself. There's no clear identity waiting to replace the old one. No label you can grab onto. No obvious passion rushing in to save you. This is what makes this phase feel so unsettling. You're standing in a doorway with nothing written on the walls, no countdown clock, no reassurance that you're doing it right. The mind hates this space because it can't measure it. There's nothing to prove, nothing to show, nothing to optimize. Without those markers, fear rushes in and starts filling the silence with stories. That's when you start hearing thoughts like, what if I'm wasting time? What if I should be doing more? What if I missed my chance? But those thoughts aren't intuition. They're withdrawal symptoms from certainty. This space feels uncomfortable because it removes control. You're no longer being pulled by the past, and you're not yet being pulled by the future. You're suspended in awareness. That can feel terrifying when you've been taught that movement equals progress. What almost no one tells you is that this in-between state isn't common. Most people never reach it. They jump from one identity to another without ever stopping long enough to feel the gap. They replace one role with another, one goal with the next, one version of themselves with a slightly edited copy. This space requires stillness, and stillness exposes things people would rather not sit with. That's why so many retreat from it as quickly as possible. But this threshold isn't a curse. It's a crossing. It's the point where life stops being something you react to and starts becoming something you consciously inhabit. Nothing is asking you to rush here. Nothing is demanding answers yet. This space exists precisely because something deeper is being rearranged underneath the surface. Feeling unanchored doesn't mean you're drifting. It means the old anchors no longer belong to you. Reaching this doorway doesn't mean you've lost direction. It means you've arrived at a place where direction can finally change without noise, pressure, or performance. One of the most important turning points in this entire experience happens quietly, almost invisibly, when you stop forcing yourself to move. You don't figure everything out, and the discomfort doesn't magically disappear. You simply realize that pressure isn't helping anymore. For a long time, you may have tried to push through this phase the same way you push through everything else in your life, by effort, discipline, and self-control. But this moment doesn't respond to willpower. The harder you try to make yourself care, the heavier everything feels. Forcing motivation creates a specific kind of suffering. It keeps you stuck in a loop where you're constantly measuring yourself against who you used to be or who you think you should be by now. Every day becomes a silent negotiation with yourself. Why can't I just get it together? Why can't I want something again? Why does everything feel like resistance? That internal tension drains you more than inactivity ever could. What you're feeling isn't laziness. It's exhaustion from trying to override something that needs to unfold, needs to be allowed, needs to breathe. There's a moment, and it doesn't look dramatic, where you stop fighting yourself. You stop trying to manufacture enthusiasm. You stop forcing plans, forcing progress, forcing meaning. In that pause, something shifts. The constant pressure lifts. Even though you still don't have all the answers, your nervous system finally gets a chance to rest. That relief isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's your system recognizing that not every phase is meant to be pushed through at full speed. This phase asks for presence, for patience, for trust in your own timing. When you allow that, you begin to notice subtle changes. Your thoughts slow down. The urgency softens. You're no longer trying to impress an invisible audience with how well you're handling your life. You start living without narrating every step, without constantly evaluating whether you're doing enough. That quiet isn't emptiness. It's space. In that space, something important starts to happen on its own. Clarity doesn't arrive as a loud revelation or a sudden surge of motivation. It arrives gently, in small moments of alignment when you realize certain paths no longer call to you and others begin to feel possible again. You don't chase this clarity. It finds you because you're no longer running. You don't move forward by forcing the next step. You move forward by allowing the ground beneath you to settle. If you've been feeling like you're behind, like everyone else is moving while you're paused, this is the truth you need to hear. You're not late. You're not stuck. You're not wasting your life. This pause isn't a punishment. It's preparation not for another race, but for a way of living that doesn't require you to abandon yourself to keep going. There's something forming underneath all this stillness, something more aligned with who you actually are than anything you've chased before. You can't see it yet because it's still taking shape, but it's there. And the longer you give yourself permission to be here without judgment, the clearer it becomes. From the outside, depression and transformation can look almost identical. Both can come with low energy, withdrawal, confusion, and a loss of interest in things that once mattered. But internally, they feel very different, even if it's hard to articulate why. Stagnation feels heavy in a way that presses inward. It flattens time. Days blur together without contrast, without curiosity, without movement. There's a sense of being stuck in place with no internal response to what's happening around you. Nothing pulls you forward, but nothing pushes back either. It feels closed, sealed, like the world keeps moving, but you're watching from behind a wall you can't touch. Transformation doesn't feel like that. It's uncomfortable, sometimes exhausting, but there's tension inside it, a restlessness, a sense that something is unfinished. Even when clarity is missing, there's awareness. You're noticing the gap between who you were and who you're becoming. Even if you can't yet describe either version clearly, that gap hurts, but it's active. It means something is shifting, rearranging, questioning itself. This is why this phase can feel so destabilizing. You might not feel hopeful, but you're not numb either. You're thinking more deeply, questioning more honestly, noticing things you used to ignore. You might feel frustrated with yourself for not moving forward, while completely overlooking the fact that something internal is being dismantled and rebuilt at the same time. Stagnation shuts things down. Transformation stirs things up. One dulls you, the other unsettles you. Transformation often feels worse before it feels better because it removes false certainty before it offers real direction. It takes away identities, motivations, and explanations that once made life feel manageable. For a while, it gives nothing back. That silence can feel cruel. But silence isn't emptiness. It's space. Space is where something new has room to form. Depression convinces you there is no movement possible. Transformation convinces you movement is happening, just on a timeline you can't control. One makes everything feel meaningless. The other makes meaning feel delayed. That difference matters more than any label. If you're aware of the discomfort, questioning it, trying to understand it, you're not stuck. You're in transition. Even when it feels slow, even when it feels confusing, transition is still motion. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you've made it this far, please consider subscribing. This content is created for people in the middle of transitions like this, and having a space you can return to when you need it matters. I don't take your attention lightly, and I'd be honored if you chose to stay connected. Thank you. Now let's move forward. If you're still here, still listening, still letting these words reach you, that alone says more than you might realize right now. People who have truly given up don't search for meaning. They don't sit with discomfort long enough to try to understand it. They don't feel the quiet pull to keep listening when everything feels heavy. The fact that you're here means there is still a part of you that cares, even if you don't feel passionate, motivated, or hopeful in the way you once did. That part hasn't disappeared. It's just resting, watching, waiting. Losing interest in everything can make life feel distant, almost like you're standing slightly outside of it, observing instead of participating. Days pass, conversations happen, routines continue, but there's a sense that you're not fully inside the experience anymore. That can feel frightening because we're taught to measure life by engagement and enthusiasm. But stepping back doesn't mean you've left life behind. It often means you're no longer willing to live it unconsciously. Silence doesn't show up to punish you. It shows up to make space for something real to form. This phase doesn't erase you. It strips you down. It removes the borrowed excitement, the automatic reactions, the identities built around keeping busy or keeping up. Once those layers fall away, it can feel like there's nothing left. But that's only how it looks from the outside. What's actually happening is that you're being returned to something more essential. The part of you that exists without performance, without proving, without needing external validation to justify your presence. That part has always been there. It's just been covered by everything you thought you needed to be. And now that the noise has quieted, now that the distractions have stopped working, you're finally meeting yourself without all the layers you built to survive. That meeting can feel uncomfortable. It can feel lonely. It can feel like loss. But it's also the most honest thing that's happened to you in a long time. And honesty, even when it's heavy, is the only foundation strong enough to build a life that actually feels like yours.